That's what I was like trying to think of how to put in the words is like, if you're gonna do something, just do it all the way. And yeah, that feeds back a little bit into, I used to run a patch, maybe I should put it back on there, the LAMF patch, but yeah, it's just, if you're gonna do it, just fully commit. And even if you have a bad year, you gotta double down. And I mean, that's the only way to succeed in a cutthroat style business, if you will, with drifting or racing or anything. You just gotta be willing to put it all in.
Oh man, wow! Chris Forsberg, you can't even see the back of his car.
Oh wow, you can see Chris initiate really early on Haraguchi's back bumper. Whoa! I don't care what that is.
Of course, it's Forsberg and the NOS Energy Drink 370Z into that second outer zone and tightens up to that front clip. And now into that final clip. Ryan, man, if this is a sign of things to come, we're gonna have an exciting day.
Great job by Forsberg. He's using the entire course. He goes wide in the first turn, goes wide in the second turn.
Chris Forsberg is our winner here in Long Beach with Sam Umanet close second and Tanner Faust.
Get it.
Yo.
You hit that door? Thanks, boss. My name is Chris Forsberg, and I am a professional drifter. Grew up back in Pennsylvania, was born in Westchester, which is about 40 minutes west of Philadelphia. Most of my childhood was spent just northeast of Philadelphia and over in Doylestown. I had an older brother, 2 years older, and a younger sister. And so my brother being 2 years older, you know, I'm always kind of like chasing after what he's into. And that's kind of how I got into cars.
Were your parents supportive of you and your first car being an RX-7?
I wouldn't say they were into the idea of getting an RX-7, but they liked that I had some sort of passion and direction. They really weren't into it as soon as I started getting into trouble. I got a couple speeding tickets with it. Actually, my first ticket I ever got with that car was reckless driving, because I was, oh guess what, drifting. And I didn't see the cop, but I was driving up to a corner that I would normally drift, and the cop was sitting right before it. And so in his mind, I saw him and started driving very erratically to escape away, or to run away from him. And I was just like cruising up to this corner, and as soon as I got to the corner, I kicked it out and drifted through it. And so he flips his lights on, pulls me over, and flips out that I was running away from him. And I was like, I pulled over as soon as I saw you, like da-da-da. Long story short, got a reckless driving ticket, lost my license for 6 months.
Should I just record the whole time?
Yeah.
You sure?
Oh, I think just back up just to get done.
I think so.
Yeah. So the reason why I got an RX-7 and how I got kind of exposed to drifting was from Tony Angelo. He was working with my brother at the time, and so I knew I wanted to get a car. My AOL Instant Messenger name was Import Turbo, because I didn't know what kind of car I wanted, but I knew it was gonna be an import and it was gonna be turbo, right? So I had that, and because I was looking at 240s, I almost bought an S14, but they're too expensive. So Tony comes into the picture, and he had an RX-7, and he was like, tell your brother to get an RX-7. They're awesome, they're fast, or whatever.
So the first time I met Chris,
I was 19. I had this really rowdy RX-7 Turbo that was like very legendary in my town, and I was sliding all over the place, and I wound up working with this kid, Chris Forsberg, who's a cook. I ran the food around, and Chris Forsberg was a chef, and he was like, oh, my brother's got a Blazer. It's really loud. It has like 615s in it. He does audio competitions. His name's Chris, and his Blazer keeps overheating. Could you take a look at it? I was like 21. Chris was like, I want to say 19 or something, somewhere in there. I think he just got out of high school, and I was like, yeah, all right, because he didn't do anything mechanically besides make cars really have super loud stereos. So I went over and I fixed his water pump for him, and he thought I was like a wizard. I wrecked that said RX-7 into a telephone pole that summer, being an idiot, and Eric was like, you should buy Tony's car. And Eric and I were friends. We were pretty good friends at that point. And so Chris was like, yo, Chris bought an RX-7 that was super clean, and then he bought mine because it had a bunch of hop-up parts on it. Or essentially he bought all the parts off of it. And then we just became super good buddies, swapping all the parts over, and then I bought another RX-7 and we started building mine up, and then that went on for a really, really long time.
And so I found one, went and picked it up, and yeah, it was because I wanted a rear-wheel drive, turbocharged car to build into a so-called drift car. We didn't even know what drifting was really at the time, but it seemed cool in the magazines. I would say probably Option Magazine was the first thing I saw, and like actually I would say like online, like forums and stuff. There was a couple guys over in Japan. Tony had a friend that was in Japan that was sending us, clips of Initial D. It was sending us like, terrible, distorted like videos from the docks of guys drifting around. And we had no idea what it was, but we just knew that these were rear-wheel drive cars, and they were like, doing moving burnouts, and it looked really cool. So that's kind of what got me into the RX-7. Well, so when I lost my license, I found the silver lining in that and tore my car all the way down and like rebuilt it, did a roll cage, did a new motor, big turbo, like ECU, like the whole 9 yards. Spent that 6 months building the car up. This is the very early 2000s in import tuning in America, and so there wasn't much to offer besides like some high offset wheels and maybe a good set of coilovers. So like we're buying a lot of our stuff off of the Japanese Yahoo auctions. Met our buddies over in New Jersey, Matt Petty and some other guys who also like they were building these cars up. We met them because I was buying another RX-7 because I wanted to make a more of a full-blown race car and then have a street car. And so we meet him and he's like, oh, you guys are into drifting? Like, so am I. And he's got this little rad Corolla, it's like slams, got cool wheels on it. And so we started hanging out with those guys through that summer of like 2002, and we realized, oh, we need to like put this all together and make an event. I can't take too much credit for this. I wasn't exactly like the forefront of it, but I was like in with the guys. It was mostly Tony, Matt Petty, and another guy, Eric Jacobs, and those three went to Englishtown to meet up with Mike Knapp to say, like we want to throw drift events. And me and like two other guys that were with us were like out in the parking lot, like setting up a little course to like show them what drifting was. And we thought we like had all our ducks in a row, and we're like, coming in to show them like the new hot ticket, right? Import drag racing was going down and drifting was gonna come in. And Mike Knapp, of course, is like, oh yeah, I know all about drifting. Like, you guys are right place, right time, like you're in. And we're like, wait, really? Like, well, we can like show you what it is. Like, no, I know what it is, it's all good. Like next month, Wednesday, you guys can have an event. It was like, no, no issues at all. And so we just spend the day there. So that was like February 03. And we spend the day there, like setting up a little course and drifting around, and we're shooting it with our like VHS-C camera, And my buddy Pete, who edited our first Drift Alliance video, he puts together a little 50-second teaser with Black Sabbath on it, and we post up on some forums like, come to our drift event, right? And through that stupid video, at that first drift event, we met Ryan Turk, he came out, Vaughn Gittin came out, and like a slew of other people that most wouldn't know. But like friends that I have to this very day all came out to that very first event. And it was pouring rain, it was awful, but everybody still had a blast.
Those early days were really interesting. A lot of us had no idea what we were doing. For me personally, it was like skateboarding with cars. I would go to these events, every Wednesday they had them in Jersey, and it would kind of be like, just a bunch of like-minded people that loved cars and was into this new sport called drifting. And we were just kind of figuring it out, pushing each other, just kind of learning off what to do. And for me, I loved cars, but came from motocross, and like Chris Chris and Tony, like they had BMX, but they were coming from BMX and loved cars. And it was really odd how it all just really came together. And I look back on it, it was just like we were similar dudes from different places and very quickly, just connected, specifically myself, Chris, Tony, and then later on came Turk. And obviously everyone knows about Drift Alliance, or most people know about Drift Alliance. And it just started very organically of just friends who loved what we were doing, but more so loved the culture and just hanging out with each other. And that was like my highlight of that era of my life, was going out to drift events with my friends and having fun.
Focus.
So we started doing the events over at Englishtown, and they're going great. More people are showing up, we're meeting more drivers, and everybody's having a great time. We're also that very same year judging the drift events for US Drift and Hyperfest. Someone's gotta judge these events, like we'll do it, right? Like we don't wanna compete, like we're good. We're judging and all that, and then all of a sudden this event pops up, the D1 Drivers Search, right? Sometime in the summer of '03, and Tony and I are like, this is it. This is our calling. Like all of our problems are solved. We're gonna go be pro drivers in California. And so we rented a flatbed pickup truck, not a tote bed. It was a box truck with the top blown off. So we had to find loading docks to get our cars on and off of them. We get our cars on, we drive all the way to California with nothing but an address for Irwindale Speedway. And we come out to the event, do some quick mods on our cars, like, kind of clean them up, get them ready. We go into the event, and long story short, neither of us made it past the first round of qualifying. And so I thought I had it covered. I felt great, I remember specifically seeing guys like Gucci and Reese Milne and those guys out at that event. Thought I had a nice, solid, clean run. We get the results, and boom, whatever the cutoff wasn't in it. And so we're half pissed, half motivated, right? And so we hang out, we meet a couple friends, same thing, fire off on the forum, hey, we're in California, who wants to party, right? And so through that very same event, I met a couple of my buddies like Lindsey Ross and some of the other local drifters. We went, and that was the first time we ever met them, and we've been friends ever since. So just so many different people along the way, from even the very beginning I'm friends with to this day, almost 20 years later. And so on the way back, we're just come up with a whole game plan. We're selling the cars, we're getting new cars, blah, 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 blah. And so I was gonna do an S14 because it was pretty new, it was only 5 or 6 years old at that point. And, but it evolved into the Z was just released that summer for the first time since '98, right? So the Z came back, everyone was making a big deal out of it. And so I was like, what if I just buy a new Z and just go make that a race car, right? That'd be a big splash, right? So my first lesson in marketing is to, basically just invest in yourself, and almost felt like a fake it till you make it type situation, because I'm sitting here, I sell my car, I put the money I had as a down payment onto this Z, I then make payments on that Z for the next 5 years into 2008, we'll say, and it had been crashed and turned into a race car 3 times over by then, but I get that car, and 3 months later, load it back up and come out for a drift show-off event that was in October. And at that event, the car was set up, it had good power, it looked really clean, it had the body kit, the wheels and everything, built it to the part, showed up, got 5th place in that event, and immediately started getting attention from people. I wouldn't say wasn't just getting phone calls right out of the gate, but was able to have a conversation with people and say oh yeah, that was my Z at that event, and people kind of remembered. It wasn't just another old beat up 240. And so that really kind of gave me a staple in California, is I'm here and I mean business. Yeah, so as we approach the first Formula Drift event, Road Atlanta 04, it was me with my 350Z, and never owned any Nissans before that. And so, yeah, like to take that car from a stock, brand new car off the showroom, strip it down, you know, engine swap it, and make it into this like, you know, pro drift car at the time. It was pretty wild. And so it was something, like I said, I was still making payments on it. It was like barely mine, but it was what I felt I needed to have to not be mixed up with another pile of 240s. And so there was a couple nice ones out there, of course, don't get me wrong, but it definitely seemed like it was just, you know, whatever kind of runs, like just bring it and enter into the event. And so for me, it was, I kind of got that lesson at the D1 event. Like, you know, drifting is not just about, you know, doing the run, it's also about looking good. And so that's why I kind of chose that car. And so the Z I thought was cool because yes, it was a brand new car, but the Z platform itself is very iconic. And so there was a lot of attention behind that car coming to the market. And so it seemed like it was the right move to be into a car that people like sought after. And I wasn't really ever an American car fan, so I didn't want to drive a Mustang or a Camaro or anything like that. The Z just really seemed to fit the bill because it was one of the very few rear-wheel drive new chassis out there that I liked. And so there was a couple new cars out there, like there was an S2000, but outside of that, it was mostly just Reese with the factory GM deal. It was Sam with the factory Dodge deal, and that was kind of it, right? Like it was just mostly a bunch of 240s and a couple Mazdas out there. My Mazda was actually out there. Tony was driving it. I ended up selling it to a friend, to another friend, and then Tony bought it from him. And so my first car was actually competing at the first drift event, Formula Drift as well.
What you're looking at here is the 06 Nissan 350Z that I'm going to be competing in Formula Drift for this year. The car was provided to us from Nissan North America, and it will be a Falcon Tire Motorsports car with the blue and green paint scheme as we did last year with most of the cars. And all the build-up and maintenance that has been performed on the car is done here at LS Automotive in Baldwin Park.
So yeah, first year of FD was a wild one, we'll say. Getting to Road Atlanta, you know, car shows up on a transporter, you know, the team sets up the tent, you know, toolbox comes out and everything else. And at that point I was like, I made it, this is it. Like, this is as good as it's gonna get. I'm like an arrive and drive driver. Like, there's my race car over there coming off the truck, and we're at this like big grand racetrack. It felt amazing, right? And so like, that was like the win right there. And so maybe that just like full positivity is like, we went all the way to the finals and took second place in the first FD event ever, which is awesome. I was so stoked, just happy as I could be. Finish the event, we go and we party all night, right? And it's awesome. And so at this point, like, race cars are getting, you know, transported around. We're getting flown into these events, and we're basically just like trying to like live like we're rock stars, right? We're like, this is awesome. We're partying as much as we can, you know, like just inviting friends out, and like we're just treating it like we're like on tour, right? And my sponsor at the time, he's like, so we need you to podium again because otherwise people will think that it was like a joke, right? The first round. And I was like, wow, that's an odd way to put like good luck this weekend, you know? And so I was like, yeah, of course, like we want to do good, so blah, blah, blah. And so, but yeah, we go out, and sure enough, we had another great weekend. It was, we went out to Sam again, but this time it was semifinals. So I went into the consolation round and then won that and ended up third. So at this point, I was only getting beat by Sam. And so it was cool, like 2 podiums in a row. It was awesome. Once again, just partying our faces off and just like loving every minute of being on the road racing cars. And yeah, third event, my car broke and I jumped into the judge's right-hand drive car, which I never drove before, and just sailed it right into qualifying. I think I qualified second in that car, which was awesome because it was like stupid fast. And I kind of like Hail Married it in there and it stuck. And so got lucky there, but then I went out first round because I misshifted right-hand drive problems, or this side, you know.
One of the standout things for me in the early days of Formula Drift was just seeing that there was kind of this distinction between Chris and some of the other drivers, at least early on. He took the approach of, you know, bringing out that 350Z, brand new chassis, well, relatively brand new chassis, and doing something that was a little bit off script from what was going on with other drivers that were in privateer programs. And he did establish himself as a massive underdog, but, you know, a dark horse underdog in a certain kind of way, because in that very first year of the championship, he got 3rd place. And that would become a continuing trend for him throughout his career, that if you look back at the statistics, he's always in that top 5. And I think it's something remarkable that it was started that long ago and that early that his success as a drifter kind of came true.
Get to Irwindale, awesome weekend. We took out Sam in top 16. I was faced up with him, so I beat Sam. First driver to beat him, I guess. And he still wins the championship. It was already done and locked in. And then I went out to, Reese the next round. And so I think I finished 3rd overall that first season.
Chris is driving his ass off, and he's finally in a position to get the job done, to win, to be the champion of that event. And he has to face Reese Millen in the finals. So yeah, he's driving his little ass off and winds up beating Reese in his factory program in his car, which was by that point super dialed. His GTO was insane. Chris beat him heads up in a giant fireball at Irwindale by just straight out driving him. And I think that moment really, you know, Chris had asserted sort of his dominance, and like, not only is this kid capable of great things, but like, he really could beat anybody here.
From absolute day one, there was just a huge gap in, you know, who the top guys were and everybody else. So yeah, Reese and Sam were like the 2 titans for sure in the first year of FD, and even still for years. Sam had the competition coupe and Dodge helping him out, and Reese had his GTO and GM helping him out. And so the very first event, you know, Sam's out there like understeer passing everybody for the win, and it looked good, so he was winning. You know, there was no rule against passing and pushing people around, nudging them off the track. Not physically, but just getting underneath them, and people kind of panic and spin out when they see a Viper like up in their window. And so he let it run, and it won the next round, and it won the next round, and it won the championship. So whatever. But I mean, he's a good driver behind the wheel, but it was definitely a maniac of a car to try and keep up with. And Reese, the only guy that really gave him you know, a bit of an edge, was in his like 600 plus horsepower, like mega angle GTO, just like super dialed car. And then, like I said, you had everybody else in just a bunch of 240s that were like trying to spin 225s. And so it was, consistency is what would win it back then. But if you faced Reese or Sam, you were just knocked out because you just couldn't keep up with their cars. I would say that to compare it to what we deal with now, it would be like taking the top like 3 like in FD and sending them to a local Pro-Am event. Like, that's how big the difference was. Like, you got guys that are barely clearing the course, they can drift their cars, they make some power and they can make some smoke, but like 50% of the time they're flying off the track, or the other 50% of the time they're kind of keeping it on the track. There's a couple, you know, shining guys in there that can like hold it together, like, you know, 80, 90% of the time. But still, like, that was the comparison. You got guys that are just laying it down every run in a fast car versus people that can barely even drift the course.
The first season of Formula Drift really was flying by the seat of our pants, so to speak. I mean, we came out of the D1 Grand Prix event that we produced with a lot of fire and fury about wanting to take this sport on and bring it to the American public. But we were going to be doing a multi-stop championship nationally here in the United States. So it was really challenging. And what was most challenging about it is it's not just like putting on an event in itself. It's all the competitive aspects of writing a rule book and safety. And really our focus was on safety in the first year or two, because we needed to see how rules should be written for cars that are going sideways inches apart from each other. So it was definitely a crazy learning experience, and I have some really strong memories from the early days, especially that very first event, at Road Atlanta. But you know, the drivers, including Chris, got to go on that crazy ride with us, and I'm sure they'd say the same thing.
I'm a rock and roll kamikaze, and you know that I die for you. When you're carrying your best, you say, man, I gotta do what you want me to.
So going into 05, like I said, we had to build that S15 in like, weeks. We build it, we get out, and I didn't qualify the first event, right? And I was super bummed. And then we worked endlessly all year long, Kevin and I, like investing our own time and money and like sponsorship parts into the car to get it to where it was. And we win Irwindale. It was great. And that is literally the last time I ever saw that car. The car went off to do a photo shoot with one of the partners on the car, and he kept it, and I never got the car back. I never got my parts back or anything. And so I was super pissed and had to start over again. Nissan was like, hey, nice win, cool, but we would like to see you driving a Z again. And I was like, sounds great, fire me up with one. They're basically like, okay, and so like somehow that worked. And so they gave me like this old, like, it wasn't wrecked, but it was like a beat up media car, right? And so they gave me a convertible, and that's the car that I then built for 06 with the Sears program, everything else. I think Falcon maybe was trying to save face a little bit. And long story short, that car, we put the Titan V8 into it, and that was the first V8 that ever went into a car for FD that didn't come with one. So we V8 swapped the car, and it gave us nothing but problems. I ended up running my old 350Z for like 3 of the rounds that year because we kept having issues with it. I didn't qualify at one event with the convertible new car. That was the second and only other time I didn't qualify for FD. And so finished 12th overall that year. So it was not a good year for me, right? I was really upset and bummed. And then Irwindale, I crashed my car, right? Because I'm just like fighting it the whole time, and Irwindale's a big track and the car just wasn't cooperating. And I ended up stuffing it, and just not a good weekend. And then as we're going into the off season, there's like a couple drift show off events, and they're trying to give me like, this leftover car to go drive because the VA car was broken because I crashed it. And so the car they give me, like that one broke too because it was, an old car. And so then I'm like, okay, like now I'm like missing out on like the fun demo events. And so I was all tuned up about that. And probably running my mouth more than I should have, just saying like, oh, I'm getting effed around and this sucks, and and so obviously word travels fast in a very small industry, and they probably didn't like that, and so they let me go. And that was basically it. It was a phone call in February, like less than 2 months out till FD. So we whip up a deal with Maxxis real quick. We find out that they're coming into the sport.
My name is Chris Forsberg, driving a Nissan 350Z with Maxxis tire at NOS Energy Drink. No laps we're doing yesterday. That should be enough to get into the top 16.
We get a couple bucks from them, and throw together a couple quick sponsors. Me and Kevin rebuild the car real quick, get it out to Long Beach. Like I said, it was a decent weekend. We went out to the winter. As we get into Atlanta, like I said, at this point, we're driving out there like not sure if we're even gonna be able to afford to get back. Just like gonna have to like run up credit cards and make it to any next round. We go out, we win that event, and we basically like carried like a top 3 level program for the rest of that season. Our first year running my own team. Like that all felt great. We got like another podium, we got another win that year. We're coming into the final round. Everything's feeling awesome. Like we're stoked to even be there and like be in the run. And then we find out we're like in the hunt for the championship. And it really came down to the last couple runs. Tanner was in the lead, and he went up against Miki, who, I forget exactly what happened, but I think like Tanner bumped the wall and like kind of straightened out and whatever, and like gets back into it coming off the big bank. And so we're like, oh, like this is it, right? And then like I guess Miki made another mistake, and so I think they had one more time that one. Won again, Tanner ran clean, got the win, moved on. The weekend ends and we finished second behind Tanner. Pretty like monumental year for us because we like threw together a hodgepodge program in like weeks and used the very same car that was a nightmare the year before, and just like learned from our mistakes, fixed a couple things real quick on it, took it out, and almost won the whole championship.
This Forsberg high on the bank, great angle, good smoke, awesome job so far. Rusakov just showing a little bit of inexperience there, but he gets to say he ran against our second place in points.
Going into 08, that's when we got our title NOS Energy Drink program. And so I had been working with NOS since 06. They stayed with me through 07, which was great because it was just the extra support we needed to get through 07, showing that they were like gonna stick with me even like when we lost the big program with Falcon. Once we like had that like outstanding year in 07, it was like, okay, like these guys can handle it, let's do the full program. So we get the title sponsorship from them. we take over the Maxxis tire service and everything. So we get tire machines out, and we're bringing like UTI kids out to run the machines, and we're doing tire service for all the other Maxxis drivers. And we got the big rig, like I just picked it up that year, like it's got NOS on it and everything. We roll into Long Beach. It was like a pretty stressful weekend for me because had this little like hodgepodge program last year, and now we're showing up like all like freaking big guns, with like this big fancy new trailer trying to show off. But sure enough, we went through and motored through that event. We won that one. And that was like a super awesome feeling because the stress of getting the big partners and like having to perform, and like I signed a contract that year that said if I didn't finish in the top 8, I would lose my deal. Like that's like the type of like stress we were on, right? Because it was like, we're gonna pay you this money, but like you better perform type thing. And so like there's always that like stress. And so to go out and win the first round was awesome. And yeah, Tanner, I think it was, Sam was second and Tanner was third at that event. And so it was like, felt awesome to like start that year off on top with like, those two super heavy hitters like right there on the box too. 2009 championship was monumental for me because it was my first championship, of course. But when you look at it from the outside, it was the first championship from a grassroots drifter, self-taught, born and raised drifter, however you want to describe that, not another professional coming over into the drifting space. Not to take away from what Reese and Tanner and Sam had achieved, of course, because they just had raw talent. We were basically trying to become professionals, for the first time. And so when I got that championship, it seemed like it almost opened the floodgates, because then it was Vaughn, and then it was Dai, and then it was Daigo. It just kind of like kept going on and on from there, like this kind of like shift in the pattern of these older, for lack of better words, more experienced racers that were very professional, very well-equipped cars coming in and competing with us, and us just kind of like throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks and trying to figure it out along the way.
Man, I absolutely remember Forsberg's first championship. He had gone out on his own, from being a team driver. And I was just so proud of him and his team and his tireless work. And it was just a huge statement for us, as Drift Alliance, and being this core group of drifters, and finally taking that throne away from the factory back guys and, these guys with all these years and years of motorsport. So it was a huge turning point. For me, there was two big things, right? And, 2005 when I won USA versus Japan and the 2000 World Championship. And then when Forsberg won Formula Drift Championship, it was just another one of those iconic moments. Even when Forsberg, another thing was Forsberg beating Taniguchi in 2004 at the D1 event. Like, that was such speaking volumes for Formula Drift and American drifting and what we were doing. And, that his championship was another one of those feathers in the cap. And I don't look at it as just about for Chris. Same thing with my big wins. It's like, it was something for American drifting and Formula Drift. Like, it was such big statements of, I know Chris, I know what he went through, what he did, and his sacrifices and challenges and tough decisions, and to see it all pay off, man, it was just such a cool thing collectively, and he deserved it. He deserved it, and he did some unique things and figured out how to keep up with Reese specifically that year, and Sam and even Tanner, and it was rad.
I gotta come back.
Vegas, that was a gnarly weekend. Super hot. I remember getting out there and it was like 1,000 degrees even in the middle of the night. Turk, that was when he did the famous bunny hop off Ueo's car. Pretty wild. And I was feeling pretty good. I got beat in the final 4 by Miki, but came back and got 3rd in Vegas, which like further pushes up the points. Feeling pretty solid. And then go to Seattle from there, which is another track like pretty comfortable with. Had some pretty good finishes there. We won there in 2007, so yeah, a very similar pattern to 2007 where we won Atlanta and then we end up winning Seattle and then start carrying the points lead from Seattle onto the rest of the year. And then we come to Sonoma.
Now, Sonoma, California is the backdrop for Formula Drift's top 6. Chris Forsberg sits on the top of the leaderboard, but Ryan Turk, Tyler McQuarrie, and Samuel Hubinette are all in the running for the championship. Drivers are locked and loaded on this episode of Formula Drift.
So, yeah, so we get to Sonoma, and we're in the points lead, and car's feeling great, it's rock solid, running better than ever. And so, forget where I qualified, but in top 32, we draw Calvin Juan, and he's in the S15, not my old S15, but another one that they got. It was actually one of Taguchi's old cars, or Taniguchi's old cars. It was an IndyCar race weekend, so the schedule was split. So this was kind of like a blessing and a curse, depending on how you look at it. So we did the qualifying and top 32 on Friday. And then top 16 was going to be on Saturday. And so we get to top 32, we're running Calvin Juan, and we were having this like heated rivalry with Falcon guys. We have essentially been beating all the Falcon drivers since they fired me. So that was kind of a little extra bonus for me and Kevin out there. Always felt real good about that one. We're going into top 32, run Calvin. To this day, well, I don't want to say it that way, because I've heard stories both ways, right? On like if this was intentional or not, or team orders or not. I've had people tell, crew members of mine will say that yes, it was, but regardless, lines up pretty well. We are first in championship, and we're running against Calvin Juan, Falcon driver, and so I'm leading first. We're going out for our lead run, Calvin's chasing, go out, throw down the big initiation, and cars running out and wide and fast. And like as I'm coming through the corner, I get smoked in the front end by an S15, which breaks my front wheel clean off the car. Things dangling off the car. It's a mess, right? And we're just like, wow, like, okay, but whatever. That's not my fault, right? Like, got run into. We get dragged back up to the top of the hill, and we just start working on the car, right, feverishly. About 2 or 3 minutes go by. The current competition director runs over, and he's like, got 2 minutes left, and we're like, 2 minutes like for what? Like, we're fixing our car, we just got smoked, He's like, 5 minutes, clock's ticking. And so like we start freaking out, people start getting all pissed, and it's like we're just doing what they can to get the car fixed. Long story short, it's too much damage to fix in 5 minutes. Calvin's like sitting over on the line waiting to go, and so it's just like, go, 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 like we gotta run this car. And so Kevin grabs a ratchet strap and runs a ratchet strap around the shock to the front of the car to try and hold the wheel from hitting the firewall as I go down the straightaway.
Calvin Juan hit our right front wheel, broke basically the rear mount of the lower control arm. And it was not it wasn't a rub in his racing. That was a punch. So that wasn't too good. So we came back, obviously tried to call our 5 minute and try to see what we could do. And from what I recall, we weren't allowed to have our 5 minute. For some reason, there was some confusion or something going on. I tried to fix it very ghetto-ly, real quickly with some ratchet straps, and sent him back out there. Followed him, but obviously the wheel was doing one of these. It was going to stay on there. I don't remember if we won or lost or how that. I think we lost, and then we won the protest, and then we had to rerun the next day.
And so we drive it back around to the start line. Competition guy's looking at the car, and you just like see him get on the radio, looks at the car, gets on the radio, like, all right, like, let's do it. So we go and, drop the lights. I go down, I chase him, and get the car down the straight, flick it into the corner, and carry it through the whole first turn around the inner cliff. But then as soon as I transfer it back to the left, that front wheel just like digs into the firewall, and the thing just spins out. Chris Forsberg ran around that second clip point Calvin Juan, going through a transition through, going around that clip and there Chris Forsberg spins, put the latter part of that track. You can see. And so, I flip out, I'm all pissed off, right? And they come over the radio and they're like, oh, it's a one more time, because he went straight and crashed into you and you spun out. So it's 0-0. Shoot the car back up the hill, try to fix it again. Same thing. They're like, clock's ticking, buddy, gotta go. Same thing, don't get it fixed. Go down, proceed to do 2 more hucks at 80 plus miles an hour with one wheel flopping around the whole time. And same thing happens. Make it through the right-hander because the thing's leaning left and this side's just not doing anything. And then as we transfer back, it digs in, car spins out. Almost made it through on the one corner, but right at the very end, dug in, spun out. I'm freaking pissed, you know, my spotter's pissed, like, you know, people in the pits are pissed, like, everyone's like pretty upset, right? So from there, it's like, you know, it's the end of the day, it's Friday, and so we basically like file our protests and we're complaining to the series. We're like, we felt it was intentional, but that's not enough to get a protest, right? And so what we ended up doing was filing that we, after the one more time, we tried to call for 5 minutes and we were denied it. And at that time, there was no rule on how many 5-minute calls you could have. And so they rushed me to the line or I would have got a 0. We protested that we didn't get our 5-minute call before the one more time battle. That was true. Maybe we could have fixed it, maybe not, because it was like almost there. Maybe 5 more minutes could have done it, who knows. So we get granted the rerun, first rerun in FD, right? Next morning, it's like first pair out, no practice, no nothing, you guys just going, right? So we're like, deal. We line up, you know, we have our car fixed, we just put a new control arm on it, and you know, we didn't change anything else, we just like finished the job. We go out, we do our run. Sure as f***ing shit, did that S15 hit me about 20 miles an hour harder in the same exact part of the track. Hard enough where he hit me twice. I go down, I flick into the corner, sailing through the turn, everything's fine. Corner of my eye, I see it coming, and like look over and just like slams into the car. Was potentially still in the gas because he hit it again. At that point, my spotter throws a chair through the spotting stand. I hear that people in the pits are basically shoving and about to fight each other because like when we went to run, like everyone kind of had an idea what was going on. So like one of the first times I've ever seen, you had about a dozen, maybe 20 drivers and like team and whatever, like lined up behind the start line, just waiting to see what was gonna happen. And when that car plowed into mine again, everyone lost their shit. And I'm screaming over the radio, my spotter's screaming at judges and people, and like it was a freaking mess. But this time, he hit me more in the door and didn't break the wheel off. So we go back up, we call our 5 minutes again, realign the car. They're trying to realign his car. It's all towed out because he smoked his front end. And we go out, do the run, and end up winning the battle. But yeah, it was not a pleasant experience in the slightest. The car just got smoked 3 times in the same spot in 2 runs. And whether or not to say on purpose, like just full blown like car smash into mine, like yeah, which it's like you see drifting, you know, then and now, when there's accidents, like you're bumping and rubbing into each other. When it seems like it's a target, and it is just pretty much a T-bone, it was a hard hit. That's why I've always been uneasy about that whole thing, because it was a little hard.
I'm not sure if Chris will come out and say this, but I think because of a lot of the backstory of Chris used to being a Falcon driver and maybe some weird things happening between, you know, him and other team members of that team, I think Chris kind of felt like that was done not accidentally. Will he say it was done intentionally? I don't know. I mean, you can look at the footage and see for yourself. I don't know what Calvin would say about it, but I know that that was a feeling through the paddock. I know Chris's team kind of felt that way. And this is part of the, you know, the weird part of the early days is we sent Chris's car back out in a more damaged position than it should have been. And Kevin Wells was actually his team manager at the time, the competition manager for Chris. And he basically strapped the wheel on to go back out. And the car didn't make it through the second run. Chris ended up losing the battle. But because of the way that we handled it, his team protested the one more time in the competition timeout, and we ended up overturning the call. Well, sure enough, all 3 of the runs that they had, Calvin hits Chris. And so you can see why Chris was starting to think that this was, you know, more than just aggressive driving. Chris ended up winning that battle, but had he not, it would have been very difficult for him to win his 2009 championship.
I left that event like I was like really wound up and pissed and starting to think that like there was more to this than just going out and driving, right? I was like, whatever, what's done is done. Next round's coming up. Turk did not have a good weekend there either. Oh, that was the other part I left out, the other big part of the conspiracy. When I was running with Calvin, Tyler, who was the highest points holder and potential for the championship on the Falcon team, his car broke. He was out in 32. Turk, I think he made top 16 or he might've gone out in 32 as well. But like the 2 contenders went out. And so it was like, oh, if won like 2 or 3 battles, I had the championship already. And then all hell broke loose. Anyway, so I was like trying to just put that behind me. I don't get too pissed off because then as it was going into Irwindale, if I won top 32, I won the championship, even if Turk won the whole event, right? And sure enough, he did and finished, what, like 6 points behind me. So like we go out in top 32. We had Doug Vandenbrink, and there was like an issue with the car because these cars didn't have amazing electronic systems in them. And I think it was like, we're like either like losing the TPS or something. Like something was like hiccuping in the car and it was like losing power or like losing response or something like that. And so, yeah, there was like a mistake made, and it was enough to call one more time because I was already like not really putting the pressure on, you know, with that like that issue we had. We get the one more time call, and then, you know, we call it 5 minutes and like sweating bullets, basically don't fix anything, like just kind of cross our fingers that it would not rear its head again. And we go out and just do the run again, and it was clean and we win. It was a very, very nerve-wracking experience because yes, we had the championship lead and it was a long shot for Turk to get it, but he was in that nothing to lose mentality and he qualified first in the event already. And I'm like, if we don't win this thing, like he's gonna win the whole freaking event and the whole championship. Like, you know, I like had this feeling. And so like, I was just like being super timid and just like barely make it through 32. That's all I'm looking for. And we do, and we get it, and it was awesome. And of course, Turk goes and smokes the whole event and wins it. You know, qualifies first, wins it, and finishes like 6 points behind us or something insane. And it was a rad year.
I mean, when we won that night, being the first drifters to actually win a championship, I think it was just a tremendous step at that point because it proved to everyone that we could beat the Reeses and the Sams and the Tanners. And I think that's what helped make a stepping point there. And I mean, Drift Alliance was a very tight group at that point. And I think that kind of also helped push JR and everyone else kind of to accomplishing that goal for themselves also. And I think that's kind of what got that going is we knew it was possible now. And everyone, you just kind of fall in line at that point because you knew it could be done.
Yeah, sitting on the sidelines and waiting for someone else to beat a guy really sucks. But yeah, it's happened that way a couple times for a couple people, including myself. Really, like that was like my favorite stat of the whole thing. Not even that it was my first championship, but that it was, the first time that basically a drift kid won the championship. You know, because like Reese and Sam and Tanner were all like professional race car drivers before they came to FD. And so just being some punk kid who liked doing burnouts fast in his RX-7, you know, learning how to drift out in Pennsylvania, moving out, chasing the dream, running through FD, and then being the first to win the championship was, that's why I say like 09 is my favorite championship. So going into 2010 and 11, that was when the big power started coming in. Everyone started to put V8s in their cars. Cars are making up to 800 horsepower. And that was when I had my first full season, not only in 370Z, but with that Nissan Motorsports engine that was making about 750 horsepower. The car was very simple. It still had factory angle, factory brakes, factory suspension links for the most part. Had all the factory steel in the back, had a factory gas tank. There was not much to that chassis in 2011. Just because it was new to us, and we were trying to develop it as we went. Going into that season, it was just once again just the consistency that got us up into the top 3 running for the championship that year without even really kind of knowing it. We're just kind of like slowly chipping away all season long, and next thing you know, we come into the final round and we're close to the top 3, but I didn't really think that we had a shot at that. As the top ranked drivers started knocking themselves out, it was a very stressful event, not just for me, but for all the people involved, because Daijiro was leading the championship, and I think he went out in like 32 or 16, like right away. And it was like, oh my God, like he kind of blew it, like it's that stress of like, now you have to sit and wait. I think Tyler McCrory had like the next shot at it, and then he knocked himself out. And then Justin had a shot at it, and he knocked himself out, crashed into the lower wall. And then all of a sudden I hear Jim Lau, because they're all crunching the numbers, trying to figure out like who's where and ending up where. And they're like, oh, if Chris wins the event, he can be the champion. I was like, wait, what? Like, wasn't even paying attention, didn't know we had a shot at it at all. I don't know, maybe it was like a little bit of a mind, because I basically like got that information as I'm going into my semifinal battle, where I'm just doing one of my like, wild card events, like we're in it to see how far we get. We were lined up with Reese Millen and long story short, he beat me. It was a fair win, so I end up in the consolation round. So it's like, okay, well, we had no idea that was even a chance, so, you know, so be it. But then we find out that it's me versus McNamara in the consolation round. And this is probably one of the reasons why there is no consolation round anymore. So we're lined up, we find out whoever gets third in the event gets third overall in the championship. So I'm like, oh, like hell yeah, like let's do this. I led first, and I go through and do my run, and it's clean whatever run, and he's, you know, pretty close, maybe a mistake or two. His car was super wound up. This is before tire to weight, and I think he made a little mistake because in the second run, I'm chasing him, and it's like, you know, hearing from the spotter, like, just keep it clean, do the run. And so I come off the bank, and with all 40 degrees of steering angle that car had stock, I over-centered the start-finish line and come around and smack my front driver's side corner into the lower wall, and like instantly just like threw it away, like, you know, crashed the car, like, don't get third, don't get third overall, you know, whatever. And like, as I'm getting out of the car, I see Darren's car smash into the lower wall. Like, the heck happened? So, I mean, it seemed like he was just going as fast as that little car could go, trying to bury me in the wall, which worked, but he ended up burying himself. And so, since we both crashed out and it was just a huge mess, they went back to the first run, which I had the advantage on, and we got the win. And so this goes to another championship, but a big mess to clean up in the third place battle, because like I always said, the third place battle is one of the best ones because it's your last chance at a podium, and so people really go for it, but you usually end up with a big mess, and it drags the show on too long, so sorry about that.
Reese Millen, good initiation, and look at that, his car ironically black as he looks like a shadow next to Reese Millen's Hyundai Genesis Coupe.
Great proximity right there from Daigo Saito, but Reese Millen a little bit offline as he transitions back around to the hairpin.
Daigo Saito having no problem navigating.
For Tyler McCory, as Daigo Saito may have an easy battle ahead of himself, and Tyler McCory now all over the track. It is definitely over unless Daigo Saito spins out.
Well, Tyler McCory knew he had a deficit. Do or die. Daigo or Daijiro. Good initiation by Daijiro, utilizing the whole track. Daigo Saito is right there, every move he makes.
Nice transition right there by Daijiro Yoshihara. Now Daigo Saito pouring on the proximity, diving into this last part of the course right here is Daigo Saito.
Out of the gate as Matt Powers initiates into that first turn, Daigo Saito is right there.
No problem on proximity for Daigo Saito, and Matt Powers continues to struggle with the whole use of the course as we come in to the hairpin right here. Daigo Saito dives ahead.
Matt Powers a bit off of that rear clipping zone, but tight on that final.
He sits atop the podium with Daijiro Yoshihara in second, and newcomer to the series, Daigo Saito in third.
There are many eras in Formula Drift that are marked by certain themes, and they mostly have to do with drivers. The early days was really about Reese Millen and Samuel Hubinet. The middle era was really about this new breed of driver, a la Chris Forsberg, Von Gittin Jr., Ryan Turk, Daijiro Yoshihara, all homegrown drifters. The Daigo era is a secondary era during that time. And what Daigo kind of brought to the series was everybody having to rethink how they approach this sport, because this is where the term proximity got coined. Daigo had this crazy way of like surging in and out, and really never really making a lot of mistakes. But it was if you think about James Dean today, where like James dives in and stays on you and is like, you know, white on rice. Daigo was the first to kind of do that in a very pronounced way, and he had this surging kind of mode, and it was so much about grip and horsepower, 1,200 horsepower in his car when he came in, and he won the championship in his first year as a rookie. Everybody rethought how to approach driving after that, and you saw it because the battles got much more aggressive, it became much more about proximity, and it really did define kind of an era before where we are now.
So yeah, Daigo shows up, and he is right out of the gate making like 50% more power than the next car. He's doing like 1,200 wheel, turbo 2J with nitrous, and you know, super wide grippy tires, and just immediately is just pressing on every single car in the field. And this is where proximity was born, and you know, it wasn't about having the angle, just being as close as possible. And he was able to do that with just like sheer horsepower and grip. And so, just break off, transfer and just drive right back in there. And, he might be taking out inner cones and this, that, and the other, but in 2012, that was the most exciting thing you could see, is the chase driver basically pushing the lead car through the course. As long as he kept drift, it was always a bit shaky, but it was just that much more exciting than two cars like this. And so I, fell into it, everybody fell into it, and we all just started trying to make more and more power, and a lot of people started breaking their drivetrains, but yeah, Daigo came in and started winning those championships, so it was pretty cool. Another fun fact about Daigo that I didn't realize, well, I'll save that for later, it's a good story. Yeah.
Through that smoke, you can barely see him. The good old Houdini. First you see him, now you don't. Man, I don't know how he is seeing through that smoke.
Well, it's tough, because especially when you have a group of drivers that are driving against each other, more or less for so long, you have a variable come in. It's trying to figure out how to adapt to that as quick as possible, right? Because he obviously is very skilled. He's not just some guy who's coming in and running in the middle of the pack. He's paving the way and setting new expectations on what tandem can be. And it's kind of like the same thing when you go to a new racetrack, right? Like we have a new venue that shows up, and all of a sudden you have to adapt and figure out that course, figure out the line as fast as possible. And we've actually been more successful at new venues, probably more than most teams, like either qualifying very high or being on the podium right out of the gate. So just as you put it, like being able to adapt and understand how to get the most out of the car as quick as possible is what's most important in our sport, because with drifting, it's always a variable. There's not a long endurance aspect of it. It could be raining all of a sudden. You have the biggest variable of all, which is the driver next to you. And so being able to make adjustments to your car and having the confidence that it's the right move, and going into a brand new battle against someone with basically zero practice on a big change on the car and being able to drive through it.
Two drivers remain, Chris Forsberg and Michael Essa. Essa is leading the championship, but Forsberg is close behind and could possibly take his second title.
So we come into Irwindale and we're sitting second place behind Essa, and it was a decent point gap, but at the time this was when the point structure was different than it is now. So in top 32, you would earn, I think, 16 points. Beating that first driver, right? So top 32 to top 16, you beat one driver, you get 16 points. But then from 16 on, it was, what, like 8 points, like 7 points, and would kind of slowly drop down until you got to the finals, where you get from second to first is another 10 points. And so he did qualify first, he put down a killer run, and he earned a couple more points than me. I think I was like, mid-upper pack. Typical, like 8 to 10 somewhere. If he went out in 32 and I won 32, which I had Daigo Yoshihara, no slouch. If he went out in 32 and I won 32, I won the championship, and it was done right there. But if he got even top 16 and went out there, I had to get all the way to second place. That didn't really make much sense to me. So it's like, goes from, if he beats one guy, I had to beat like 4 to beat him, but if he got knocked out and I beat one person, like I would win. So the point structure has been changed since then. It makes a lot more sense, but that was the potential scenario. And so here we go into the top 32 battle. He's the first driver out since he qualified first, and I'm like 4 pairs back with Dai. We saw that they were having some issues in practice and try not to think about it. We're like, they'll get it together. Don't even think about that. Focus on the event. He pulls up and goes to do his first run. He's running against Luke Bakula, which is one of his buddies. And so that was his first time qualifying as well into a Pro 1 event, well, Pro event at this time. They take off and Essa goes into the course, and he gets around the bank, and at some point in time coming off the bank or the start finish, wherever, car shuts down, brakes, loses power, and he basically coasted back in. Bakula like kind of goes around him, drifts around the last turn, and then pulls back around to the start finish line, does a little 180, pulls up to the start. Essa's car comes rolling in, hood's up, he's out of the car, helmet's off, safety gear off, and they're basically just like, arms up, like car's done. And I'm sitting there, like I'm strapped in, like 2 pairs out, like watching this whole thing unfold, and I was like, oh my God, this is actually happening, right? They're looking around the car, and the official goes over to Bakula saying like, Essa called 5 minutes, his car broke. Bakula's like, let me make sure my car's okay. It made some noise. He drives straight forward, does a little figure 8 on the front straight, pulls back around, goes back over to his pit and parks the car. And so we're just sitting there like, okay. And like, you know, I got my spotter in my ear, like, don't worry about that. Like, he basically knows he's out and we got to go out, beat Dai, win the championship. So he's like, don't worry about that. Don't worry about them. Focus on your run, blah, blah, blah. So we go out, we do our 2 runs with Dai, and we get the clear win. And so it was not easy. I was super stressed out. I was like all shaky, you know, thinking about it, because that was like the scenario we were hoping for. And so we go out and we do the run, we come back in, and as we finish up our run, we see, what was that? I forget what actually happened physically, but it was, we were told that, you know, Pakula can't present his car to the line, so he forfeits his second run, thus giving the higher qualifier driver the win. And so Essa's car was dead in the water. Pakula's car, who drifted the last turn, drove to the start line, did a burnout, and went back to the pit, now could not present himself back to the start line. And all he had to do was that in order to get his first top 16 finish in his first pro event. You would think that any driver would want to achieve that. However, he did not. And so he parked the car, Essa gets the push into top 16, and you know, we're up in the stands kind of like, you know, waving our arms around, like not in the stands, we're up in the judges tower, like waving around like what is this, like what is going on? His car clearly works, he's forfeiting on purpose, like is that allowed? And there's like no real rule, I guess, against that. And so we, you know, we put in our protest, but it wasn't really against anything. There wasn't really much we could protest for. So we go back through the whole halftime thing, and you know, top 16 comes and they like drag Essa's car out there and like, you know, buy a truck and park it there, and it was just whatever. And we had to now get all the way to the finals in order to win the championship. And then top 8, I get Daigo. It was close, like his car was tight. I came under him in the start-finish line, or I'm sorry, I came under him at the end of the bank. I took out the candlestick, and that was enough to give the win to Dai, and so I was knocked out, and that was it. Daigo goes on to win the whole event, and Essa then wins the championship, and we were pissed, for lack of better words. So not a good ending to that season. Yes, we got second place, but it didn't seem like people were playing fair to get that championship. That's the way it seems, because you know, they're very good friends. It would be like if Dylan did that for me, and I would never want him to do something like that, right? Especially if it's like your very first event, your first qualifying thing. You have an opportunity to be in the top 16 intros, which some drivers still have never done. You're telling me that all you had to do was put your car back to the start line, which it not only did donuts and a little burnout, and then drove itself back to the pit. You could get that thing to the start line if you wanted that win. But he didn't. He got out of the car and just kind of like walked away from it. That's where it doesn't make sense to me, because any driver will drive their car till the wheels fall off, right? Or anyone that calls himself a driver will do, you know, take that chance to get the win, even if the car is at stake. You're not even being asked to drift the course. You gotta drive at 40 feet.
I've heard from people in and around Chris's camp that after 2013, there was almost like a renewed sense of competition fire that he brought into 2014. And no surprise, that's the second championship.
I don't think 2014 would have been as successful as it was if what happened at Irwindale didn't happen, because it just left a sour taste in my mouth, and I was just like, you know, mad, and you know, this whole like points, this, that, and the other, and you know, contact versus not, and blah, blah, blah. And so it was like, we went back and stripped the car down, rebuilt it, trying to make it as good as it could be. Put, you know, some additions on the car. Mostly the nitrous was the big thing. So we added like another 150 horsepower to the car and just came out guns blazing. And it was another thing that we focused on, that, you know, another reason why Essa had won that championship versus us was he was always qualifying higher than us too. And so we put emphasis on finishing higher in qualifying and not just worrying about the tandem, which is what I usually typically focus on. That year, we not only won the championship, but we also got Ace of the Year. We're the highest qualifying driver all season long, which I would barely even like get like the high spots, let alone just out there just like getting firsts and seconds and thirds all season long. So all those points add up a lot, you know, especially if you get a lot of top threes. And so we, you know, put emphasis on qualifying. It was just like a different mindset. It was like screw you, we're here to win, you know, like nothing else. And it was like, you know, I won the first event, and like, yes, it was exciting and it was fun, but it was more like, I've done this before, like I'm doing it today, like type attitude, you know, like there's nothing stopping me. '14 was easily the best season we ever had. We won the first round and we held the points lead from the first round to the last round, never lost it. Highest qualifying driver that year, and we did it on the lowest budget that I've had in the past decade because we actually lost NOS at the time as a primary because they were undergoing major management shifts and they're spending their money elsewhere, and so I was basically on a like quote unquote severance package with them for that season, which was why the car was just all black and had no door sticker. So it was just kind of proving a point that, you know, we didn't have our primary and we're just out there just for the sheer sake of just kicking the shit out of everybody. Yeah, and the helmet, I had the Stilo helmet that year, like, I don't know, it was just like a whole different like attitude. It was strange. Not in a bad way, but you know, everything was just like, we're all just out here racing, we're doing our best, and like for some reason there was just like such like a vengeance that year because of 2013. I just like didn't want there to be like any second guessing that we were the champion that year.
The 10th season of the Formula Drift Championship came to a contentious close as Chris Forsberg was outdone by Michael Essa, who took home his first ever championship. But as we enter the 2014 season, Forsberg seems to have a renewed focus and vigor to go along with his matte black 370Z.
The first championship, it was different because there was so much more for me to lose in 2009, as in I had a very large lead, and like I had to go out first round and Turk had to win the event and qualify first. It was a big gap. But for this one, it was close. Like Osbo was like starting to chip away that second half of the year, and it was very much like okay, we won our round, he won his round. We won our round, he won his round. It's like, okay, here we go. And then as we met in that semis, like we knew if I went out to him and he won, he would take it.
He was in the chase position.
Osbo locked and loaded coming into that front clip. Nice job by both the gentlemen, but Forsberg falling back a little bit, Ryan.
Wow, this is a big event right here as Frederick Osbo seems to be getting the better of Chris Forsberg once again.
Well, it bears repeating, if Osbo gets the win, it does not mean he grabs the championship. He still has to win the event.
Here we go.
And Frederick Osbo gets the win.
So it was right down there to the end. So it was more stressful, and so, you know, getting knocked out and having to sit there and watch it happen was a terrible feeling, for lack of better words. You know, being out of the car and just waiting for him to mess up or daigo to beat him. And so once it actually happened, like, yeah, it was just a huge flip in emotions versus like, you know, that 2009 feeling like, okay, just don't mess up, everything's fine, you know, and just get through the event. And yeah, that was a wild ride.
Osbo wins, he gets the win and the championship. Daigo Saito gets the win.
Well, with Daigo Saito getting the win, Forsberg gets a championship, Osbo in second place, and Forrest Wang in third.
You know, Chris in a 17-year career has had many rivalries, probably some more cold-blooded than others. The rivalry with Frederick Osbo, I think, is a really strong and friendly rivalry. Those guys shared podiums back and forth for a long period of time through that 2013, 14, 15 era. And I think it has given us some of the best drifting that we've ever seen and made both of those drivers more complete. I mean, what's interesting if you look at the trajectory of Chris's career, one of the reasons why he's been able to be on top is that he has had an uncanny ability to adjust to new inputs coming into the series. You see the two big, you know, American manufacturers come into the series with the little privateer. He adjusts, gets third place in his first year. By 2007, he's got a second place in the championship, you know, against the likes of Reese Milling, Samuel Hubinet, and Tanner Faust. You have the Daigo era, where in a quick number of years, he adjusts, captures that second championship. And then in arguably the most competitive years prior to James Dean and Peter Vincent coming into the series, he backs up another championship in 2016. And that ability to adjust not only the vehicle make that he's working with, but his driving style, I think, is what has made him, you know, definitely a Hall of Fame drifter.
You know, at this point, there's a lot of drivers like starting to win their first championships, you know, from 2009 and on. And so there hasn't been a second championship since 2008. So it was like kind of like reliving 2009 over again, where it was like, okay, like that was like a milestone, being the first grassroots driver to win a championship. Now it's like, okay, here we are 5 years later, the first driver in a long time, I should say, to win that second championship. So it's kind of just showing that we're still in it.
The 2014 Formula Drift season left us with the tightest championship chase in recent history. But in the end, it was Mr. Consistency, Chris Forsberg, who was able to fend off Frederick Osbo for a second overall championship.
So yeah, 2015 was another stressful year in the beginning, I should say, because we actually still hadn't been switched on with NOS again. Like we're just like waiting on, you know, contracts and like the big shift with NOS and Monster Energy and everything else and Coca-Cola. We actually ran that whole first half of the season without like financial support from that side of it. So it was like just like the constant stress of like just pouring money into the race team, like borrowing from wherever we had to, and you know, like running up credit cards, and just that whole like you just like race car drivers are some of the dumbest people like when it comes to professions, because it's like, well, like if I just keep spending more money, it's gonna come back eventually, right? And like usually that doesn't happen. And so that year was like kind of stressful on one side of being a team manager. And so, you know, we're coming off a championship year, like everything seems great, and we're still just trying to figure out how to like keep the team alive, right? And like show up. The pros and cons of being in charge of the ship, right? But as we go on the actual track side, like we were getting a couple podiums, everything does, you know, get switched back on, and things are going well. The car was very similar to the year before. We didn't make many changes to it. We ended up, yeah, like it was Gucci and Osbo really just killing it all season long, but you know, we were just chipping away a little bit every time, and we ended up getting another top 3 finish, 3rd place overall that year, which was the 3rd year in a row at that point of top 3 finishes, especially with MA Motorsports. Like those guys just, as long as that car ran, like we're putting it on the box. Running your own team is highly stressful because you got to figure out how to pay for everything, and of course it takes amazing partnerships, which we've had for a very long time, but you know, that all comes in waves too. Whether it's, you know, like one late check is, you know, a very stressful situation at times. And so you still have to make sure the guys get there. I never didn't pay my team. They always came first. I never asked them to take a pay cut or hold out on a check. Like it was always important to me to take care of the people that were taking care of the team. And so like that was always first priority to me. And if the car didn't get the upgrades that it was, you know, queued to get, then that was my fault. But it's like, take care of the guys that are working for you. And up until then, I had been, like, I still couldn't like afford a driver because that's a very large expense. And so I was driving the rig to every single event still. From 2007 till 2016, I think I missed like 3 trips where either Kevin had to do it or I had to hire someone else to do it. But like to every single round of FD, I was driving those rigs. And so that was, I mean, that's stressful in itself because you're on the road for 4 days straight. You get there and you're just like mentally drained. You know, it's not like physical effort, but it's just mind numbing, you know? And so being able to be in a position to not have to drive your own rig, I highly recommend that to any driver because that definitely, it's a hard thing to kind of come out of once you have to switch back to being a driver.
Honestly, you know, the career of Chris is really interesting to think about, especially if you followed it from the beginning, because he was how a lot of young drivers are treated today. You know, young drivers come into the sport, they've got some really high-grade talent, you know, they're trying to piece things together, they're maybe not having the success that they want, but everybody likes them. You know, think about like Chelsea Denofa earlier on his career. Chris was just like that. That's how he was treated. As he got more successful, and this is a weird phenomenon in Formula Drift, I think a lot of the hardcore fan base kind of pushed back against Chris. Like, it's almost like winning is a bad thing for some segments of the drifting populace. But the battle that I think really turned the tide for him in terms of it having the most impact on him personally and the biggest impact in the drifting community was really in 2016 against Forrest Wang. That battle will go down in history as one of the most controversial. The after effects will go down in history as some of the most like nasty and hardcore. I mean, there was vandalization, there was death threats, there was people, you know, really taking to it on social media, going crazy. And at the end of the day, Chris was in the right, and you know, all the facts show that. But you know, it was against Forrest, who has like this really hardcore following, and they just dumped on Chris so hard. And I think that was really hard for him to go through that. There was a lot of hate and vitriol, and Forrest ended up leaving the series for like one event and then coming back. And it was a tough time, for everybody to kind of experience that and go through it. And I know for me, like my heart dropped when I was behind the scenes watching the scores come in and just knowing like, oh my gosh, this is gonna turn into a crazy thing, because it just happened to be against Chris, like one of the most winningest drivers, against like this really grassroots, super styly, very popular young guy. And everybody's gonna think that Forrest got the short end of the stick here. And that's exactly what everybody thought, or what a large chunk of Forrest's fan base thought. So I think that battle in particular was a really big impact for Chris, and something that he probably still thinks about today.
Here we go, who's gonna come out on top? Forrest Wang, a feint entry, initiating into the bank. Forrest Wang throws it in. Forsberg falling down there quite a bit, coming now into that first front clip. As Forrest Wang and Chris Forsberg get into it.
Third place in Atlanta, and then we got third place again in Orlando, and then we move into New Jersey, and that was, Jersey is the other fun event that I've had in my career, because that was when I smashed into Forrest Wang, and everyone lost their freaking minds. And so, in my perspective, which we had to put videos out because it just seemed like this malicious attack from one of the top teams to this like poor little grassroots driver type thing. And Forrest is a good driver, and he came off the bank, and when he transferred off that very steep bank, his right wheel basically like a link broke on the right rear, and his wheel went like fully toe out. Like you could see it in like a video angle. Like it comes off and like all of a sudden you see like half the front tire. And so when that happens, like it's just gonna make your car like rotate and you have no forward drive out of it anymore. And so he comes across that inner clip and the car just is like, he's basically just off throttle trying to save it, from spinning, which is what I would have done. But since it's just so much smoke, when you look at my, my car's point of view, it's just like a whiteout. And as soon as I come out of the whiteout, it's just a door. And I slam into the front of his car, hard enough to break my front wheel off. It appeared that I just like stayed in the throttle and drove right through a car that was like mega angle. So we go back, fix the car, they assess it, giving fault, and we end up winning. Yeah, fans weren't happy about that. So, and not only fans, but Forrest as well. Forrest then and there retired from Formula D forever, breaking all of his contracts, pissing off a lot of sponsors. And it was just a mess. And I then got completely bombarded for a week straight with not only like hate messages, but even death threats of being like the worst driver like ever in FD, because Forrest just quit. I feel that the right call was made, like especially like going back and looking at video, looking at the in-car video, like we came off the bank with the same angle that we ever did. We knew that he was slower through the course, and so like we're trying to like be on our toes to like not run into him, because my spotter's like, oh, like he's really slow in his transitions, like okay. But like yeah, when we came through the smoke and just ran into him, it was just like, I'm like yelling at him. I'm like, dude, like I didn't do anything different. Like just driving the cars, like I couldn't see. We didn't hit the cone. We cleared the cone, and we had the angle, and everything was normal. And so it's like this, the replay after replay after replay, and they completely denied that they had a broken part, that the car was fine. And one of the old techs on the team told me, oh yeah, like the right rear tow arm was completely broken off the car. At that point, it's like I said, I would have done the same thing. Car breaks, you keep driving as best you can, and you put it in the hands of the judges to see who made the mistake, right? That's all we can do out there. They made the call that his car was obviously at a disadvantage. It came across had not been discovered yet of braking zones and momentum parts of the course, but he came through just very much on the brakes, not where he was supposed to be, and they put the fault on him. And so that is now why we have braking zones. So I was gonna say it wasn't that bad for me based on that the right call was made, but it was bad in regards to I lost a lot of respect from a lot of fans that day because of that call. Chris Forsberg gets the win is now very much a thing. It started at that event because of that battle, and it's because there are many people that thought that I wasn't deserving of my success and I would just be handed the win in any sort of call that could be controversial, right? Or close, if you will. You know, I obviously don't believe that, but at that point it's like, well, what are you gonna do? Just like play into it. You can't stop them, you know? So like that hashtag and that saying and whatever has been going on for, 4 years now.
I believe that that's just the thing that happens. That you have, the same thing was happening to Reese and Sam and Tanner to some extent, that they were the veterans, the old guys, and all the young people were trying to beat them. So the younger, newer guys had more excitable fans that were into it. So now Chris has become the veteran because they're not there. Now he's beating up on the kids, and now the kids' fans are responding. So I think that's just kind of a natural progression as the sport goes and drivers change, that at some point you're gonna be the bad guy. As we make rules and progress towards the judging regulations and stuff like that, all that stuff kind of has to be considered, because we need all these drivers basically to be with us, and we all need to get along on this. But it's too hard. If it's too much freedom, it's too hard for you to explain how they're judged. So at some point you have to rein it in a little bit, because you have to have it make sense to the fans. If it's so complicated because there's so much freedom and so much nuances, it doesn't help anybody.
Anyone can go out and drive the course, but to not have like the stresses of everyday life, relationships, financial stuff, you know, social media, back talk. Like, I mean, you have to be able to switch that off no matter what, as soon as you start driving. And like, I know that's like a pretty cliche thing to say. Everyone says that, like, oh, the helmet goes on, you're out the win. But like, it's a lot more difficult than it sounds. Just been so heated all season long. Not to say in a negative way, but just like we just kept lining up, right? And it's just funny how that happens. Like there's like these seasons where you just keep seeing the same guy. And so start running through the event, and yeah, we get to top 16, sun drops, course tightens up. Irwindale is this type of track where we come in all guns blazing and just really kind of going, when I say checkers or wreckers, I mean, it really comes true at Irwindale, because I've crashed there more times than all other tracks combined, because it's like just kind of going for it. So Vaughn, he has a mechanical and crashes out in top 32 against Pat, which I fully thought I was gonna have to run Vaughn in top 16, and same thing, like whoever wins is maybe gonna go on and get the whole thing. That's in my mind, and so when he gets knocked out, it's like, cool, now it's just Osbo. And so just like off the list. But when I'm lined up with Pat, they come over and basically mention like, oh, the nitrous isn't working, like, so we're kind of down on power. We are talking, we're like, okay, well, what do we do? Like, should we, you know, loosen up the car? Should we this, should we that? And we're like, well, my car's running awesome and it's super fast, you know, let's just like take a little grip out. So we take just like a little bit of grip out, which is probably was only enough to really make the change from day to night, and not really enough to make the change from day to night and a slow car. The car just felt super tight behind him, and we come through the start finish cone, and we're kind of like surging up on him as we transfer back. Like I'm basically full brakes trying to stay off of his car, because like that's like where our car is the fastest, is from the start finish to that lower bank. We're basically surging in on him way too hard. I get on the brakes, which just opens up the radius, and then crank the outside wall and smoke the whole car off. And I'm just like, cool. I just threw it away, right? Like Osmo's gonna go and get his championship. Drag the car off the wall, and I'm just like, whatever, like here we go again. Go back and have to sit and watch the event unfold. I definitely will say that I did not think that Matt had it in him. Not because I didn't think he could win the event, but he knew the stakes. He knew that if like he beat him, I won. If he lost, Osbo would win, and this, that, and the other. And it's funny because like they go out and they do their runs, and like he totally nailed it. He was on one that night and went on to win the whole event. It was awesome. And of course, like after he wins, like, you know, I run over to him. I mean, I went to Osbo as well, and we congratulated each other and hugged and all that. It was good runs. But, you know, I go to Matt and I was like, you son of a bitch, you know? And he was just like, I told you I got you know, just like typical Matt Field, like I'm gonna go win this whole event type mentality. And I was like, you freaking, you know, go do that, you know? He was like, just like, he was more hyped up than I think I was. He knew that he played a major role in that, and you could see that he was like, you know, because he just came off the win in Texas, and he's like, I'm winning here tonight, and then he did. That was like a whole different Matt than I've seen ever before. And so it was cool to see that. And of course I was, you know, favoring Matt, but like, I feel like the first one like could have been called, but since it was so close, like there's like high stakes on the line, it's kind of like the same old, well, like, let's get a clear winner scenario. And yeah, then Osbo made a little mistake, surprisingly. I was definitely more happy with 16 than I was in 14. Because 14 was just kind of carried that same attitude like the whole season long. Like, we're here to win a championship. and that's it. And like 16 was just like, it was just like reaffirming we're just a good team, good driver, good car, good setup, good whatever. What was cooler to me than just that, the third championship, was that we just went 4 years in a row in the top 3, finishing second, first, third, and first, which no one's really ever done that, especially up until that point. I mean, you know, when you're talking about the 3 championships, like I almost more so look at the top finishes. And so at that point, in 14 years, we finished in the top 3 8 times. So more than half of the seasons of FD, we've been in the top 3. And then outside of that, only finishing outside of top 6 2 times. You know, like you gotta get good finishes all year long, finish well overall. Like you can't just have like a roller coaster of a season and expect to do well. The mentality of adjusting and adapting and getting as far as you can every time. You know, even if the car has an issue or, you know, like you're not feeling, you know, up to it, like, you know, you got personal stresses, like stuff outside of the car, or if the car's not performing, or if, you know, like whatever the case is, even if like you're physically ill, it's like you just have to like get in there and get as far as you can every time.
You know, Chris has had such a storied career. There's so many different endpoints you could pick up on to highlight. I think one of the things that I cherish most about his involvement in the sport is, you know, being an ambassador for the sport of drifting and also being somebody that helps other people. I mean, one thing that people don't really know that much because it doesn't get a lot of press is that Chris and his team are some of the first to loan out parts to help drivers with their setups. There's a very famous scene, a funny one, a couple of years ago in Road Atlanta with Chris Stapp's Blues. Chris Stapp's was, you know, timing down on a competition timeout and it needed to get this tire off to get back on. It was up on jack stands. If you look at the shot that we presented there and you look off just to the right, the team that's helping Chris Stapp's make it through that 5-minute call is Chris's team. Chris Stapp's ends up blowing off the jack stands, becomes like a really famous moment in the live stream. But, you know, that's just emblematic of what I've seen over the years. He has been able to have a fine balance of being a tough competitor and strong and knowing what needs to get done, but at the same time understands the big picture of what's going on here and that the sport as a whole is an important thing, that you have to treat it like anything else that you love and enjoy. It's got to be nourished, it's got to be taken care of properly, and you know, Chris has done a good job with that over his career.
The competitive side of the series now is out of control. There are so many drivers that are capable of winning a championship, and the fact that James did it 3 years in a row is insane. I mean, that's a complete feat in itself to come in from, you know, another series. He has so much competitive driving time, if you will, just like driving all these different series where he's always running door to door in competition mode. That's just how he operates. And you can see that at the track where he is just like, from the first run to the last run, he's running perfect and smooth and ready to win the event. And yes, people are like kind of closing that gap in and beating them here and there, and that's cool to see because like we talked about, you know, the underdog comes in, everyone's rooting for him, and then now 3 championships later, like you're seeing like a lot of like hate towards James, which is unfortunate because it happened very quickly for him. And so, but in the end, it's, you know, it's the most competitive driving I've ever seen. You know, everyone is absolutely door to door all the time. For us to still be able to, you know, go out there and run and podium and finish in like the top 5, 16 years later, is pretty awesome. Of course we want to win championships. Like, we're not going to come out to FD and not try and win a championship. And I was really looking forward to this season because we had 2 new tracks and, you know, I was like, car's feeling awesome. It's like really dialed. The engine program is out of control. We were really feeling confident coming into this season. And not to say I'm not anymore, but it's now just completely uprooted. And so once again, it's like, who can adapt? And so maybe we'll adapt even better than just to 2 out of 8 tracks. And you know, this new format of no qualifying, only tandem, focusing on getting good as quick as possible. And it's funny, like we always laugh, like our best runs is like the first and second pass off the trailer every weekend, every time. Because it's the only time where we're not as focused on the track. It's just like, okay, go like feel out the car, feel out the track. Dust it off, clean it up, warm it up. It's like, okay, go feel it out, see how the car feels, see how the track feels. And like, you're just out there just driving for yourself, essentially. You know, you're not driving for the fans, you're not driving against anyone, you're not driving for the judges, and you know, just like lay it down. And so from there, like, you know, you just start like nitpicking every little aspect to get the competitive edge. And so that's like where like you'll kind of start to make mistakes. Of course it can get better, but you just start over dissecting the run. And so, Yeah, like, so we have typically shined in times of little practice, kind of being thrown like into the fire head first and, you know, just figure it out. Yeah, I don't know, just to me it's another year and we're just gonna go out there and give it the best we can. Outside of what we obviously do here, you know, we built this garage and it was specifically for, you know, the builds and doing content because it's become such an important part of the whole program. It's not just about going out and racing like it was 10 years ago and just getting results. Now it is having to wear, you know, multiple hats and not just talking about sponsorships. It's like being not just a team owner, manager, but now like a shop manager, and also, you know, helping with working on the car physically. Even this year, everything that's going on, I had to put more hours into the race car than I ever have, or not say ever, but like in the past like 10 years because, you know, my crew's not here and they can't get here. And so if and when this car breaks, they're gonna be yelling at me. So that's like something that's new and different for this year, is like having to be a little more hands-on with the car. But then, yeah, as far as like the builds and the videos and daily content creation, even on just like the Instagram and like the story side, that's what's the most engaging. And so showing what you're doing daily and, you know, being that influencer or that, you know, provider of content, however you want to break that down. I don't like to use the word influencer, but just because I'm just still doing the same things I've ever done. I'm just now turning my phone, you know, on and showing it. Like, we've always been building cars, we've always been having fun, and now it's just showcasing it as much as possible in a setting that really shows kind of how far we've come. I mean, there's definitely times where there's certain people that you see, like same thing like with like Chris Stops or like Matt Field, you know, in certain years where you're friends with this person, you see potential in this person, but you know they're fighting an uphill battle. And I've been there, you know, just showing up with a knife to a gunfight in Formula Drift years back. There's only so much one guy can do. You see problem, like you run over and offer to help. And then, yeah, like back in the pits, you know, like we always laugh that like I'm a gear chart like Rolodex, you know, like people come by, you got a 329, you got a 427, you know, and just like, yeah, here you go, you know, and like it's fine, because in my opinion, or I guess my theory is, you know, it's just like golden rule mentality. It's like I help anyone that comes by if I can, because I would hope that if I ever needed a part that they would help me. Early 2018 year, I was approached by the LA Sports Walk of Fame, which is it's like a walk of fame, if you will, down in San Pedro, which is specifically for athletes and, you know, people that have just been monumental in not just, you know, stick and ball sports, but in like Olympics and things like that, and mostly centered around the Southern California culture. The organization kind of recognized me as, you know, being part of the SoCal family, like, because I came here to chase a dream of being a race car driver, and you know, having success at Long Beach and being at all the Long Beach events, you know, since day one, and, you know, earning my championships and basically all my accolades while being a resident of SoCal, if you will. They saw that, and myself, along with 2 other drivers and riders, we were the first motorsports athletes to be inducted in the Sports Walk. That's a good finish, I think.